300 pounds of human concrete blocked the center of the corridor, arms crossed, eyes dead. The air in cell block D didn't just go quiet, it was sucked out of the room. Every inmate, every guard, every pair of eyes pressing against the bars locked onto the collision course. On one side, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. On the other, a lifer named Ron who didn't give a damn about pay-per-view. The CO's hand hovered over his panic button, knuckles bleaching white. He knew the math. Violence in here didn't happen in 3-minute rounds with a referee to save you. It happened in heartbeats, and usually, it ended in a body bag. 6 hours earlier, March 1992, the Indiana Youth Center. Mike Tyson stood naked on a freezing tile floor. Lift your sack, cough, bend over, spread 'em. The intake officer's voice was a monotone drone, bored and clinical. They weren't processing a celebrity, they were processing livestock. They took the bespoke suit, the Rolex, the dignity. They handed back a bright orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. Mike didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He just stared at the wall, his eyes glazed over with a cold, detached rage. At 25, he was supposed to be wrapping his hands for a title defense in Vegas. Instead, he was being erased. Officer Patterson, a 50-year-old lifer with gray skin and eyes that had seen too much, unlocked the transport gate. He didn't look at Mike. He looked through him. "Let's get one thing straight," Patterson muttered, the words barely escaping his lips as they walked the long, echoing hall. "Out there, you're a god. In here, you're a trophy. Every punk with a shank wants to be the guy who dropped Iron Mike. Keep your mouth shut, eyes forward, and maybe you won't bleed out in the shower." Mike's jaw tightened, a small rhythmic pulsing in his cheek. He knew the ecosystem of violence better than anyone in this building, but Patterson was right. The rules had changed. Patterson keyed the magnetic rock to D-block. The bolt retracted with a sound like a gunshot. General population. The smell hit first, stale tobacco, mold, and adrenaline. As the gate swung open, the ambient noise of the block, the shouting, the cards slapping tables, died instantly. It wasn't respect, it was assessment. 100 predators measuring the new meat. And there he was. Blocking the narrow walkway to Mike's cell stood the landlord. Ron wasn't just big, he was wide, built like a vending machine loaded with bricks. Scars mapped his forearms. He stood dead center in the lane, taking up all the oxygen. Patterson stopped short. "Ron, move, I'm escorting an inmate." The big man didn't blink. He didn't look at the guard. He looked down at Mike, a slow, arrogant smirk spreading across his face. "I heard the rumors," Ron said. His voice was terrifyingly soft, like gravel grinding under a boot. "Just wanted to see if the little man is as tough without his gloves." The silence stretched, tight enough to strangle. Inmates gripped the bars, waiting for the explosion. Patterson's hand drifted to his radio, his voice cracking just a fraction. "Last warning, Ron. Move your ass or you're going to the hole." Ron held the stare for 3 seconds, an eternity in prison time. Then, slowly, he stepped aside. But he didn't clear the path. He left just enough room for Mike to squeeze by, forcing the contact. As Mike passed, their shoulders brushed, hard. Ron leaned in, his hot breath hitting Mike's ear. "Welcome to my house, bitch." Patterson shoved Mike into cell D4 and slammed the slider shut. The lock clicked. Safe. Mike's cellmate, a wiry junkie named Carlos, was sitting on his bunk, face pale, looking like he was about to vomit. "You have no idea what you just did," Carlos whispered, his eyes darting to the bars. "That's Big Ron. He runs this block. Protection, drugs, gambling. He killed a guy in the mess hall last year with a cafeteria tray. The guards, they're more afraid of him than we are." Mike sat on the thin, lumpy mattress. He didn't look scared. He looked focused. "Does he always block the hallway like that?" Carlos shook his head, terrified. "No, never. He's never done that for anyone." Mike looked out through the bars. Down the hall, 50 feet away, Big Ron was still standing there, watching, smiling. Carlos's voice dropped to a tremble. "He wasn't blocking you to intimidate you, Mike. He was marking you." Mike looked down at his hands. They weren't trembling. They were fists. He realized then that the heavy steel door locked behind him wasn't there to keep the other prisoners out. It was there to keep him in.
and he realized that the heavy steel door wasn't there to keep him safe. It was there to trap him in the cage with the lion. But the real test wouldn't happen in the dark. It would happen at noon, under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the cafeteria. The mess hall in the Indiana Youth Center was a sensory assault. It smelled of boiled cabbage, industrial bleach, and suppressed rage. It was a cacophony of plastic trays slapping against metal tables and hundreds of voices shouting over the din. It was also the stock exchange of the prison, where debts were paid, hits were ordered, and hierarchies were enforced. Mike walked the line, grabbed a tray of gray mystery meat, and scanned the room. His cellmate Carlos had vanished, pulled aside by a guard for a random search that felt anything but random. Mike was alone. He spotted a neutral table near the wall, occupied by a few guys keeping their heads down, trying to be invisible. Mike slid into an empty plastic chair, keeping his back to the wall, eyes scanning the perimeter. He took 2 bites of the flavorless mash before the light above him was blocked out. A shadow fell across his tray. The noise at the surrounding tables died instantly, a silence spreading outward like a shockwave until the entire cafeteria froze.
"That's my seat." Mike didn't flinch. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and turned around. Big Ron loomed over him like a skyscraper, arms crossed over his massive chest. He wasn't alone. 4 of his lieutenants had fanned out in a semicircle, cutting off Mike's exit routes. Mike looked at the cheap plastic chair, then back up at the giant. I didn't see a reservation on it. The air left the room. 100 inmates stopped chewing, waiting for the violence. Ron's smile was slow and terrifying. "Everything in here is mine unless I say different," he said, his voice dropping to that velvet-wrapped threat. "That includes the seats, the food, and the punk celebrity inmates who think the rules don't apply to them." Mike stood up. He moved deliberately, not aggressively, but he refused to remain seated while another man stood over him. That was a tactical error he wouldn't make. Peripherally, Mike saw the co's lining the walls. They weren't rushing in. They were leaning back, hands resting loosely on their batons, watching with bored curiosity. This was gladiator school. They wanted to see if the heavyweight champion of the world could take a shank or if he'd crumble. Mike's heart hammered against his ribs, but his face was a mask of stone. He had 2 choices. Option A, back down, give up the seat, and become a target for every predator in the block. Option B, swing first, try to knock the giant out and end up in the infirmary or the morgue. But Cus D'Amato, his late trainer and father figure, had taught him there was always a third option: change the geometry of the fight. "You're Big Ron," Mike said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Ron blinked, the aggression faltering for a microsecond. "Yeah?" "I did my homework," Mike continued, keeping his voice steady, loud enough for the lieutenants to hear, but intimate enough to feel personal. "I heard you run this block. I heard you're a businessman. You understand leverage. You understand survival." Ron's eyes narrowed, curiosity warring with the violence. "What's your point, Tyson?" "My point is, you're testing me. I get it. New fish, big name. You need to show everyone I'm not a threat to your operation." Mike took a half step closer, invading Ron's personal space just enough to show he wasn't afraid. "But here's the reality. I'm not a threat. I'm just trying to do my time and go home. I don't want your racket. I don't want your chair." Mike paused, letting the words hang in the dead air. "But I will not be disrespected." He held Ron's gaze, stripping away the celebrity persona and showing the killer underneath. "So we have 2 ways to play this. We fight right here. Maybe I sleep you. Maybe your boys jump me. Either way, the guards throw us both in the hole for 30 days. You lose your business for a month. I lose my parole date. Nobody wins." Mike gestured to the empty seat across the table. "Or we agree that I'm not in your way, you're not in mine, and we both eat lunch in peace."
The cafeteria was so quiet you could hear the hum of the vending machines. Ron stared at Mike, searching for fear, searching for a lie. The seconds stretched out, agonizing and long. The lieutenants shifted their weight, waiting for the order to attack. Then the mountain moved. Ron threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a mocking bark. It was a genuine, deep-bellied sound of amusement. "You got stones, Tyson," Ron chuckled, shaking his head. "Most guys would have swung or begged. You didn't either." "I'm just doing the math," Mike said, not smiling. Ron nodded, impressed. He reached out, grabbed the plastic chair opposite Mike and spun it around. He sat down heavily, signaling his crew to stand down. The tension in the room snapped like a rubber band, and the noise of the cafeteria slowly returned. "All right, champ," Ron said, picking up a fork. "Sit. Let's eat." Mike exhaled, the adrenaline leaving his system in a rush. He sat back down, thinking he had defused the bomb. He thought he had won, but then Ron leaned over the table, his voice dropping to a whisper so low only Mike could hear. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of dead serious warning. "You passed my test, Mike, but you better watch your back," Ron murmured, eyes darting to a group of inmates sitting in the far corner. "Because I didn't step to you just for fun. I did it because someone on the outside put a $50,000 bounty on your head, and I wanted to see if you were worth killing." Mike didn't blink. He didn't look at the shanks tucked into the waistbands of Ron's lieutenants. He just held the big man's gaze. "So," Mike whispered, his voice steady as a heartbeat monitor, "why aren't you collecting?" Ron stared at him for a beat, calculating. Then he leaned back, the plastic chair groaning under his weight. "Because a dead celebrity brings heat. Investigations, lockdowns, that messes with my business, and business is good." For the next 10 minutes, the cafeteria disappeared. It became a boardroom meeting between two CEOs of violence. Ron didn't offer friendship, he offered a syllabus on survival. He broke down the prison economy with the precision of a Wall Street broker. He explained who controlled the cigarettes, who had the guards in their pockets, and exactly where the blind spots in the security cameras were. "You keep your head down," Ron murmured, picking at a callus on his massive hand. "You don't buy, you don't sell, and you don't lend. You stay neutral. As long as you don't mess with my flow, I'll make sure the other wolves know you're off the menu." Ron stood up. The movement was a signal. His 4 lieutenants stepped back, opening the perimeter. The deal was sealed. Ron looked down at Mike one last time, his expression hardening into concrete. "You surprised me today, Tyson. That doesn't happen. But listen closely. This isn't a partnership. It's a pass. If you ever try to undermine what I built here, we're gonna have a very different conversation."
"And there won't be any talking." "Understood," Mike said. Ron walked away, parting the sea of inmates like a barge moving through bark water. As he left, the tension in the room finally broke. Forks started scraping plates again. The whispers resumed, but the dynamic had shifted. Mike Tyson, the most dangerous striker on the planet, had just won his first prison fight without throwing the punch. That night, back in the dim, claustrophobic safety of the cell, Carlos was pacing the floor, looking at Mike like he was a ghost. "I don't know how you're still breathing," Carlos hissed, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "I've seen Ron break guys in half for looking at him wrong. You just negotiated a treaty with the warlord." Mike lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling of the top tier. "I didn't do anything special. I just realized he's a businessman. I treated him like a human being instead of a monster." "You got lucky," Carlos muttered, exhaling a cloud of smoke into the stale air. "Maybe," Mike said. "Or maybe I just learned the rules." Word spread through the complex before lights out. The story mutated as it traveled from cell to cell. In some versions, Mike stared Ron down. In others, he threatened to take over the block. But the veterans, the lifers who watched the chess match in the mess hall, knew the truth. They knew that Iron Mike had just displayed a weapon far more dangerous than his right hook: restraint. D'Amato had always told him that violence is easy, control is hard. In the ring, you win by destroying the opponent. In here, Mike realized, you win by turning the opponent into an asset. But as the lights flickered and died, plunging cell block D into darkness, Mike couldn't sleep. He turned on his side, listening to the coughing, the snoring, and the distant clanking of keys. Ron had called off the dogs for the day. The $50,000 bounty was on hold. But a bounty doesn't just disappear. Mike closed his eyes, but his muscles stayed tight, ready to spring. He had survived day 1. He had 6 years to go. And in the silence of the cell, he remembered the one detail Ron hadn't mentioned. Ron controlled the general population. He controlled the yard, but he didn't control the showers. And tomorrow was shower day.